Gene Deal just dropped a bombshell that flipped the entire Motor Incorporated versus G-Unit saga on its head. According to him, Ja Rule was the one who actually put $25,000 on 50 Cent's head. And to make it worse, Irv Gotti wasn't just aware of it, he was in on it. Gene Deal didn't sugarcoat it either. In his words, Ja Rule and Irv Gotti were straight up putting out contracts, and he claims a $25,000 bounty was moving through the streets with 50 Cent as a target. That $25,000 number wasn't random either. In street circles, it's long been known as a standard price to have someone touched or even taken out. Gene says this was openly being discussed by people with one foot in the industry and the other in the streets. In other words, Ja Rule, Irv Gotti, and Murder Incorporated allegedly orchestrated a hit that was supposed to wipe 50 off the map. Gene even said it before in an Art of Dialogue interview. It wasn't Supreme behind the hit, it was Irv Gotti and his circle. And that right there, that's the reason 50's hatred for them runs so deep. Now, nobody was ever arrested for putting money on 50's head, and officially, that case went cold. But the timeline speaks for itself. First, 50 clashes with J.A. and Irv. Then, he gets stabbed inside the hit factory by Motor Incorporated, his own black child, who later admitted to it publicly. Not long after, 50 gets shot 9 times outside his grandmother's house. And while the feds never put J.A. or Irv's names on the shooting, Gene's revelation just dragged all that fire right back into spotlight. He's saying they knew exactly what was going down. And the ties run even deeper. Supreme was a longtime Murder Incorporated associate, the same Supreme that 50 called out by name in Ghetto Chiran. That track was the final straw that put a target on his back. What Gene is exposing now is that the hit on 50 wasn't just street beef, it had music industry fingerprints all over it. The label, the artist, and even the XX allegedly had to look the other way for something like this to move forward. And here's why people are taking Gene's word seriously. He was there. He was Diddy's bodyguard during that era, moving around the same rooms as all the power players from Bad Boy, G-Unit, and Motor Incorporated. He knows the code, and now is breaking it. But the real question is, why speak now, nearly 2 decades later, about Irv and J.A. trying to take 50 out? According to Gene, it's simple. The truth got buried, and he feels it's time to dig it back up. What he said next. It puts Irv Gotti dead center in the mess. Gene claims Supreme might have been the muscle, but
Chaz had worked a deal out for Irv Gotti them to give 50 $250,000.
Irv was a mastermind. At first, Irv and J.A. tried to keep it clean, offering 50 Cent $250,000 to squash the beef. They even sent Chaz Williams, a respected street figure, to mediate between both camps. But when 50 refused, Gene says Irv flipped the script completely. And here's how he laid it out. Things shifted real quick, from let's squash it to let's take him out the second that $25,000 bounty got put in play. According to Gene, Irv and his people dropped the bag themselves. He painted Irv not just as a music exec, but as a man making moves in both the boardroom and the block. Which raises a question, was Irv Gotti really just a label boss? Or was he playing something bigger all along? For years, Irv carried himself as a face of Murder Incorporated, the mogul who built J.A. Rule's career, shaped the label's sound, and strutted like a king. But insiders always whispered he wasn't just selling records. He was moving weight in the streets, too. His connection to Supreme wasn't casual. It was legendary. Supreme wasn't some neighborhood hustler. He was a kingpin of Queens. And Irv stayed locked in. So close that by the early 2000s, the feds were investigating Murder Incorporated for laundering Supreme's drug money straight through the label. So when Gene says I personally greenlit a hit on 50, it don't sound far-fetched. It sounds like the kind of call I could have made without even picking up the phone. And let's be real, everyone knew 50 and Irv's war was never just about music. This wasn't lyrical beef. It was blood deep. When 50 got stabbed inside the hit factory,
who saved him? People be like, God. Your first thing is, yo, God saved this guy. Maybe the devil, maybe Satan saved him.
Irv and J.A. tried flipping the script, waving around fake paperwork to label 50 a snitch. It was nothing but a desperate smear attempt to tarnish his street credibility. When mediation failed, the feud got darker and darker. The hit rumors only grew stronger. What's crazy is it still pops up in interviews years later, downplaying his role, saying he was blackballed unfairly. He always points the finger back at 50, accusing him of destroying his career. At one point, Irv even claimed that 50 had the devil on his side, and that's the only reason he survived. Why would you even say that, unless you really tried to take him out, and it didn't work? And Irv said it with his own mouth on Vlad TV. But now Gene's on record saying Irv wasn't blackballed at all. He just finally got exposed. And if that doesn't convince you, maybe this will. 50 Cent himself has co-signed Gene's story, calling him one of the rare industry voices who actually tells the truth. Meanwhile, Irv's been busy rewriting history on podcasts and documentaries, pushing this narrative like he was some victim of 50's rise, when in reality Gene says he was plotting violence in shadows. The wild part? This claim doesn't just expose motive, it puts the money and the power directly in Irv's hands. Something even the feds never said out loud. But Gene didn't stop there. He says Murder Incorporated had helped keeping the lid on it. And what comes next blows the whole cover wide open. When 50 got lit up outside his grandmother's house in 2000, you'd think the music industry would have stopped in its tracks. You'd think the labels, the XX, the artists, even the hip-hop press would have rallied behind him. But nope, there were no statements, no outrage, no pray for 50 campaigns. Just pure silence. And that silence, it screamed louder than anything else. Because it wasn't just the streets protecting Supreme, it was the industry itself. Supreme had deep roots in music, tied to artists and XX who moved millions. And he wasn't the only one. Jimmy Henchman, another heavy name connected to both the block and the booth, was managing artists like The Game and had his own war with 50. Years later, he'd be convicted of ordering a hit on one of 50's crew, Lodi Mac. That culture of fear stretched for years. Between Supreme and Henchman, 50 was boxing by enemies with money, clout, and whole street armies. So when he got shot, most of the industry either didn't want the smoke or were too busy cashing checks from the same people who wanted him gone. To make it worse, after the shooting, 50 wasn't treated like a victim. He was treated like a liability. Columbia Records cut him loose on the spot, shelving Power of the Dollar. Major publications spun it like he brought it on himself. He wasn't supported. He was blackballed, frozen out, and stamped too dangerous to touch. And why? Because he had called out too many names and made enemies on both sides, the streets and the suits. He made enemies on both sides, the streets and the suits. How to Rob had already ruffled feathers, but Ghetto Churan, that was the line in the sand. 50 didn't just diss rappers. He exposed real operations tied to real street money. And with Murder Incorporated tied to Supreme and Jimmy Henchman managing major artists, labels wanted nothing to do with him. They didn't want the smoke, they didn't want the headlines, and they definitely didn't want war. So instead of defending a man who barely survived a near-fatal shooting, they treated him like the problem. And that silence, that wasn't just fear. It was protection. Now here's where it gets even darker. The man allegedly responsible, Daryl Hamo Baum, a known associate of Supreme, was murdered just weeks after the hit on 50. Whether it was street justice or a cover-up, it worked. After Hamo got clipped, nobody wanted to talk. Not to the feds. Not to the press. Nothing. And as Gene Deal points out, this wasn't coincidence. It was a system. A machine that protected Murder Incorporated, kept Supreme's hands clean, and punished 50 Cent for surviving. Which raises a real question. How many XX knew the truth and stayed quiet? How many looked the other way while the streets handled business? Because when 50 got shot 9 times and lived, he didn't just survive, he turned it into power. That moment became the backbone of his entire brand. From that day forward, he wasn't just a rapper from Queens. He was bulletproof. But here's where Gene Deal shakes the table. What fans turned into a myth was actually a plot. And the industry knew it. 50 didn't hide from the trauma. He owned it. He built an empire on the back of those bullets. The covers, the press photos, the interviews, everything radiated survival energy. Calm, dead serious. I got hit 9 times. I'm still here. Now what? And when he dropped Many Men, Wish Death, he wasn't rapping fiction. He was reliving it. That hook wasn't poetic license. It was literal. The paranoia, the revenge, it was all real. Fans felt it because they knew it was the truth. But if you're a 50 fan, you can't help but wonder, why wasn't anyone ever held accountable? Everyone knew what happened. 50 nearly died, yet nobody stood trial. Yeah, the streets say it was Hamo, but Hamo got murdered weeks later, and Supreme went down years later for unrelated charges. Nobody ever answered for nearly taking 50's life. And that's Gene's biggest point. This wasn't random. This was a hit, greenlit by people with real money, real power, and real reach. The only reason 50 Cent is still here? Luck, timing, and God. Gene said it best in a recent interview. Like my man told me, you can't stop what God's got planned. Even the feds back it up. Court records, wiretaps, and testimonies all suggest Motor Incorporated affiliates and Supreme's crew were tracking 50's moves, plotting, waiting. Jam Master Jay's own death was even investigated for possible links, because he was warned not to work with 50. That's how deep the blacklist went. Now let's talk about J.A. Rule's role in the hit on 50. Was he really the mastermind, or just the face of a bigger machine? Everyone knows J.A. was deep in the beef. He had motive. He had history. But Gene Deal is saying straight up, J.A. might not have pulled the strings. He might have just been the front man, while the real orders came from way higher up. 4 years, J.A. has played the misunderstood artist card. The caught-in-the-middle victim of a feud gone too far. He has painted 50 as a bully, the instigator, the one who brought the war. Even told Mathoffer, how you the bully and the victim at the same time. But Gene ain't buying that polished story. He calls it what it is, a cover-up. See, J.A.'s been giving interviews for decades, talking smooth, brushing it off like it was old music. Just bars, some stolen chains, a little ego. He's always downplayed the violence, saying it was media spin or 50 playing victim. Even after the studio stabbing, J.A. tried flipping the script. Claimed 50 ran to file a restraining order, except that paperwork turned out bogus. He made it look like 50 was scared, soft, even snitching. But Gene's saying none of that's true. He says J.A. wasn't just Motor Incorporated as rapper. He was active in the street meetings, standing right beside her when the plays were being discussed. In his words, J.A. wasn't no innocent bystander. He knew the moves. He just let her take the heat. And here's the wild part. On social media, J.A. stays quick with the shade. He laughs at 50, throws memes, drops slick captions. But whenever fans or interviewers bring up the real street beef, he dodges, keeps it light, never addresses the whispers. And that silence, strategic. Because if J.A.'s really as innocent as he claims, then why has his name and his label always been tied to street plots, retaliation, and violence? Gene ain't sugarcoating. He says that J.A. was just the artist narrative is cap. He calls it a long-running PR cleanup that started when the feds put Motor Incorporated under microscope. According to Gene, the peaceful, misunderstood Ja Rule image wasn't truth. It was survival. And that's the bombshell. Because if Gene's right, J.A. wasn't just a pawn. He was part of a machine that tried to erase 50. He just won't admit it. And the timing of all this couldn't be more perfect. Irv Gotti's new interviews where he's still crying victim, plus fans revisiting hip-hop's darkest chapters. It's all making people look back at Motor Incorporated with new eyes. So here's the reality. J.A. can keep denying, keep deflecting. But Gene's message is clear. J.A. was there, and he ain't clean. And Gene's last warning? He says this is just the beginning. More names are about to drop. Gene Deal didn't just wake up one day and decide to start spilling tea. When you line up the dots, the timing speaks louder than anything else. The guardrails of the music industry are collapsing right in front of us. The Diddy raids, the lawsuits, the exposés, every dark corner of hip-hop's past is getting dragged into the light. And right there in the storm, Gene's been one of the loudest voices. Let's call it what it is. Gene's been on go since the second Diddy's name popped back into headlines. Remember, this is a man who stood next to Puff as his bodyguard in the Bad Boy era. He was in the rooms the public never saw. And has got receipts. According to Gene, Diddy wanted him dead long before YouTube ever heard his name. He said it himself just days ago. This dude had a hit on me way before y'all ever knew me. From Biggie's murder to East Coast power plays, Gene was in the middle when it all turned ugly. So now, with Puff facing sex trafficking charges, federal raids, and whispers of a RICO case, Gene's message is sharp. I'm not going down with him. But Puff isn't the only target. Gene's also putting Irv Gotti in the hot seat. Irv's been out here doing his media tour, drink champs, interviews, podcasts, trying to polish Murder Inc.'s image. He's painting himself as a misunderstood label boss, not the shot caller everyone swears he was. Gene isn't buying it. He says Irv and Ja Rule spent 2 decades rewriting history, acting like they were innocent rappers caught up in a beef, when the truth is they orchestrated real street moves, including putting a price tag on 50's head. And while J.A.'s back on stage smiling, playing the hits like Everything Sweet, Gene's calling foul. This ain't over. For Gene, this isn't just about pointing fingers. He's drawing a line between what he witnessed and what he'll be held accountable for. It's about survival. He knows the storm is here, RICO charges, lawsuits, Fed circling, and if there was ever time to talk before the fire gets too close, it's right now. But Gene also says it's bigger than him. He's tired of powerful men dodging the truth while the real victims stay buried. He's sick of watching the industry turn trauma into marketing. According to Gene, this isn't about clout. It isn't about revenge. It's about finally telling the story for the people who didn't make it out alive and the ones too scared to speak. Still, the question lingers. Is Gene Deal exposing the truth or flipping the script to protect himself? Some call him a hero for breaking the code of silence, shining light on the rot beneath the music. Others say he's just getting ahead of the narrative, scrubbing his name before someone else paints him as complicit. Maybe it's both. Because Gene stayed quiet for years. But now, he's naming names, talking dollar amounts, and breaking down motives. And notice this, almost nobody's stepping up to deny him.